Let's see if that does what it's supposed to. Fingers crossed it does, guys. Sometimes I don't know what I'm doing. No matter how many times we do this. And give it a second. Here we go. Something's happening. All right. There we go. Perfect. All right, I see it. I don't want that. Make sure that that doesn't happen. All right. Good morning, good morning. We're just giving this a second. And yeah, basically I was giving it a minute because I know sometimes it takes people a minute to pop on. I don't want stars to be an option, but I don't think it's listening to me either way. So we're gonna roll with that essentially at the moment. I'm going to give it a second, but I know we already hit 8:30, so I will probably just go ahead and get started. I meant to start a little bit sooner to give people a chance to hop on, but things are not working in my favor. So we're going to go ahead and just jump into it, I guess. There's a lot to talk about. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today. My name is Jolene. I'm a certified songbird feeding specialist with Wild Birds Unlimited of Concord, and today we are going to be talking about thrushes, which is a little bit self-indulgent because only one of these species can be really seen by the feeders during the wintertime, which does line up for the period that we're in. I know we're in fall, but a lot of our non-breeding species or wintering species are going to be in the area. So keep an eye out for any kinglets, yellow-bellied sapsuckers, our yellow-rumped warblers, pine warblers, common yellowthroats, and of course our dark-eyed juncos as they all kind of start to move in as well too. So good morning. Thanks so much for tuning in. So if you guys have any questions during the presentation, definitely feel free to leave a comment. I'll do my best to kind of pay attention, but if I don't get to it, I will answer it at the end of the presentation. So with that, we're going to just hop right into it. So one thing that's really fun about the thrushes that I'm talking about is that they're actually in the same family as American robins and bluebirds. So both of those birds we've kind of talked about before. I've done presentations on both, and I thought it would be really fun to talk about some of the other thrushes that are in the same family. The ones we're focusing on specifically are in the genus Catharus and Hylocycla. We're going to see if I pronounced that right. So there's plenty of other birds. There's over 100 species in this family. So this is just going to cover a small portion of them. But both of the ones that I'm talking about today can be found in North Carolina during certain times of year. These birds prefer more of a wooded habitat. So overall, because the range can be quite large, and there's a large variety of thrush species in North America, usually they can do anything from deciduous, mixed, or coniferous woodlands, so your pine trees, your cedars, or more like your maples and oaks and things like that as well. While you also have some that specialize a little bit more in suburban woodlots or have some open grassland habitat. These birds are also long-distance migrants, so it's not uncommon to have some during the spring and the fall migrate from North America to South America, or vice versa, depending on the time of year as well. One of the main birds that we'll talk about today is the hermit thrush, too. So with thrushes in general, a lot of them are going to look very similar and have certain characteristics that you're looking for. In many ways, their shape is very similar to that of a robin. They're a little bit smaller, and they have a similar posture. They have that kind of same longer, smaller straight beak. They have a round head and a long tail. Their overall body looks a little bit chunky compared to their size, but they're very cute in general. Again, the hermit thrush is going to be one of the species we're talking about primarily, as that's one of the birds that we can get primarily in the wintertime. They have a more dark brown kind of color on the head and on their back, while as it travels down closer to their tail, they get more of a cinnamon reddish color, which is honestly very pretty. These birds also have a paler chest and belly, and you can see they have a lot of spotting that starts pretty heavily on the throat before kind of fading as it goes lower along the body as well too. These birds do also have a thin eye ring, not as contrasting and prominent as some other birds like certain types of warblers or maybe even kinglets, but it is subtle and there. This is an example of some of the other thrush species that we have in North America. A lot of these, for at least the gray-cheeked thrush, which is down here, the Swainson's thrush, and the Bicknell's thrush, we have them primarily in migration, or there might be a small population that's kind of in the Appalachian area for certain ones. The Veery themselves can be found in the summertime as well in the Appalachian area, so it depends on where you're at as to who you'll see. They can be harder to distinguish from one another. You'll find they have very similar beak shapes. that round head, that chunky body, and that longer tail. So they can be very difficult to distinguish. The veery is, of course, that kind of lighter reddish brown color. Meanwhile, the great-cheeked thrush and Bicknell's thrush look very similar, and the main way to identify them is by song. So definitely some interesting ones to distinguish and pay attention to if you ever get the chance to see them during migration, or if you're in the mountains in the summertime. So the fun thing about hermit thrushes is that they are one of the most widely distributed forest nesting migratory birds. So for the birds that we get in the summertime that are nesting, they have a very wide range in comparison. Because they cover the east to west in North America, they actually have a variety of subspecies. So remember, subspecies can change a little bit of characteristics, color patterns, physical attributes, depending on where they live and their overall habitat. Their 13 subspecies can be divided amongst 3 primary groups, some in the east, maybe like slightly North Pacific or the Western Mountains. So basically anything that has whether it's a mountain range division or things like that, can kind of separate these groups a little bit. So just to show like some interesting differences between some of these subspecies, your smallest individuals are found by the Pacific, if I didn't say that right. You have birds with the shorter bills along the northern range, while the longer ones are in the south. And then you also have slightly different color patterns. So you have more reddish brown hermit thrushes in the east, you have more dark brown colorations in the North Pacific, and then you also have more pale gray colorations in like the western mountain areas. Of the forest thrush species that we have, and of the ones that I'll talk about, the hermit thrush is the only one whose population has remained stable in the last 20 years, which is definitely something for sure. This is the only species of the genus Catharus, so of those 4 species that I mentioned earlier as well, to overwinter in North America. A lot of the other ones have this kind of larger northern breeding range, and then they fly all the way down to South America or lower Central America to overwinter there as well. So with the hermit thrush, you see they've got a really fun range map. They've got a very large breeding population all the way from Alaska and various parts of Canada, and then they have their wintering range in Mexico and a lot of the southern states in the US as well too. In certain areas, especially a big part in like the southwest US, they do have some year-round range in this purple section here, but you can see they have some purple areas kind of scattered all the way throughout, which is again really interesting to kind of pay attention to that and where they prefer. So you can have some year-round populations in certain areas. Overall, these birds prefer more open woodlands in comparison to some of the other species, and they also do enjoy like wooded residential areas. So like I said, of the species we're talking about, these are ones that we can most likely see at the feeders during the winter time. They do dislike snow, so that's why they come down a little bit farther south in the winter time. And regardless of where they settle in the winter, the females will winter farther south than the males will. And this can happen amongst a few different species of birds. And one of the reasons for this is so that the males can make that trip faster back to their breeding grounds in order to stake like their territory sites and everything as well. When the hermit thrush is kind of on the move, just in general, they travel through the lower levels of trees and shrubs, so you're not going to be looking through the canopy for these guys. They kind of hop more than walk, so unlike the robins that we see kind of dashing forward and everything, these guys kind of hop a little bit more. And one thing that does happen quite frequently is that they'll do a lot of wing or tail flicking compared to other thrush species. So that is an indicator to help determine what species of thrush you're looking for if you see that kind of tail flicking behavior. Now, something else that is interesting but not uncommon is that these birds do not normally sing on their winter grounds. Many species of birds do not sing in the winter in general. They will call. Songs are basically used to announce territory and to help attract potential mates, usually sung by the males, although females can do the same depending on the species. So this time of year, there's a lot more calls. These are a little bit more short, simple, to the point. They help with communication, alerting of potential predators, things like that as well too. But as the season starts to switch back to spring, sometimes you can have a little bit of those songs as well too. So, for example, this is what a hermit thrush song sounds like, and I apologize if my sound is not the best, but these are truly some very gorgeous songs. So give this 1 second here. So it's kind of a metallic sound a little bit, and it's got like a little bit of a twang in there, which is really fun. Hopefully you guys heard that okay as well too. Again, you think I know this by now, but sometimes my sound mixing is just horrible. So not only do they do that type of song, which if we're lucky enough, depending on the time of year, we may be able to hear, but this is more of what we will hear in the winter time, as they do a lot of those calls. And during this video, you can also keep an eye on, they do a very exaggerated tail flicks in here. It might be a little bit more subtle depending on the time of year, or not the time of year, when you see them and their behavior. But this is a mix of their call and that tail flicking behavior. So it's a very standard chuck call. Can be hard to distinguish sometimes with certain species. And you notice a lot of that tail flicking and that wing flicking movement that can occur with the hermit thrush. And again, not a lot of other thrush species do that behavior, which helps kind of with identification as well. Now, outside of the winter time, so when we get back, which we are just getting into colder weather, so I don't want to push anything along, but when we get into the summertime, we actually have a different visitor, at least in the state of North Carolina, called the wood thrush. These birds are a summertime resident in the Appalachian and Mid-Atlantic area, so you can see we get them primarily in the summertime. They are one of the birds that are heavily affected by destruction and fragmentation of both their nesting and their wintering habitats. So these birds kind of are on the lookout as to how their populations are going, and there is some concern there. And in most cases, depending on where you live, you're not going to see them in more open areas. They prefer a good forested area with a sub-canopy layer of shrubs, a lot of shade, moist soil, and a lot of leaf litter as well too. So this one, depending on where you live, might be more of a bird walk than it will be in your backyard. And oftentimes these birds are heard more than seen, and it is definitely a song to hear. It is absolutely one of my favorites. And again, kind of like that hermit thrush, it has a very kind of heavy twang or dual sound to it, which is really interesting. So with these songs, there are 3 parts to it: a smaller short first part, kind of a longer duration in the middle, and then kind of that last note twang as well too. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. Just some identification factors. They look very similar to some of the other thrush species that we mentioned earlier. However, compared to them, they have that cinnamon kind of brown color on the crown and nape, and it's a little bit more richer in comparison. They also still have that kind of duller white eye ring. As you travel along the body, it changes more to like an olive brown on the back, the wings, and the tail. And compared to some of the others, their spotting is a little bit more deeper in color and also more contrasting in comparison to the hermit thrush and some of the other thrush species as well. So something really cool about a lot of the birds in this family is how they utilize their syrinx or their voice box. And so to talk about that, we're going to have a little bit of anatomy lesson because I always love those things. So we're actually going to switch over slightly to a Cornell Lab PowerPoint example as well too, which I love that for them, and I appreciate these resources so much. So essentially the syrinx is located right before oh my goodness, the trachea separates into the bronchi or the lungs, right? So it's this section here, and then it leads to both your left and your right, at least the birds, their left and their right lung. When it does that, and when the bird breathes outwards, they have 3 pairs of muscles that help control the syrinx, or these little flaps of muscle or tissue located right on that pathway. And depending on the species and how they utilize it, these muscles constrict and relax and change the sound of the air that passes back through. So for a lot of species, they often just kind of have one pathway open at a time. That's why we get different types of noises. And depending on the beak shape, the speed of the air being released, and the way that the muscles are constricting will determine how those noises are made. In wood thrush, and sometimes veery and other species, they are capable of using both the left and the right section at the same time. So what that does is, this is just an example of what that section looks like closed. So for example, nothing is happening at the moment. and I wish I could show the volume on this one, but I don't exactly have that. But for the wood thrush, they are able to use both sections of the syrinx at the same time. So when we hear their calls and we do recordings of those, we're able to see both a higher and a lower note occur at the exact same time, which is a really interesting thing, and it's a very cool aspect about the wood thrush that I really enjoy as well. So they excel at kind of using both aspects, and that's just really interesting to kind of see and observe and listen to because it's such a gorgeous sound. So wood thrush can essentially produce a duet with itself because they're able to use both parts of that. Like I mentioned, their song consists of 3 different sections, and they have a repertoire of 4 to 8 notes for each part, but they only use 1 per song. The first and the third section of their song are innate or invented. It's just whatever it likes to hear, while the middle repertoire is learned from nearby thrushes. So it's in a mix of innate behavior and those that are learned from other individuals, which, again, I love learning about that. I don't know nearly as much about this as I like, but it's a very interesting topic as well, too, and you can definitely hear it when you're out and about listening, especially in the summertime. Now, a lot of these birds do prefer a lot of insects and fruits. Oftentimes, they'll focus a lot on insects in the summertime, and then depending on where they're wintering, for example, the hermit thrush still winters in the southern U.S., and some insects may not be as available as they would be in the summertime. They will focus more on a fruit-heavy diet. Certain birds like wood thrush prefer a lot more like soil invertebrates and snails, which is why they have a lot of that leaf litter in the areas that they kind of forage. These birds often do a lot of ground foraging, so kind of like the robins, they will kind of check certain places. They'll hop, kind of take a look around on the ground with one eye, twist their head to get a good shot and a good area, good look at any potential prey items, and then thrust their bill quickly into the ground to capture prey. So there can be a lot of probing behaviors. They can do a lot of like flicking leaf litter out of the way in order to determine what's hiding. You do have some that are able to kind of go up and glean off of the leaves and grab fruits, obviously, from the trees themselves. So it depends on the species. One interesting behavior that I really enjoy learning about is that the hermit thrush utilizes something called foot quivering. So this is going to be a very subtle behavior, but essentially what this bird is doing is it's taking one of its feet and stamping it on the ground in order to flush out any insects. So this is a very subtle behavior that you would just think, oh, well, you know, he's got an itch. He's just moving his foot out of the way. But it's actually a planned foraging strategy. So let me see if I can help if you haven't noticed. So see, their left foot right now is kind of slowly taps as well too. And it's just a very subtle motion. But again, that's just what they utilize. So just lots of different foraging behaviors out there. Some of my favorite to observe. And of course, one thing about the fall season is with all the leaves on the ground, it is not quiet. And I will turn the video off just to keep, not the video, the sound off just to make it easier while I'm talking. But if you ever hear the rustling of leaves, it doesn't hurt to stop and take a look as to what it could potentially be. For certain species of birds, they have no problem flicking leaves out of the way and getting some really good distance. So you would be surprised whether it's actually a squirrel kind of hopping around or whether it's a bird kind of making a huge mess trying to find some food that they can eat. There's lots of different behaviors that you can hear a little bit better in the fall because the leaves make quite a lot of noise as well. So I mentioned a little bit that these birds do also eat a lot of fruit, especially kind of in the winter time. They have no problem plucking and swallowing fruit whole. For those that are larger berries and larger seeds, they'll just kind of regurgitate those. But those that are smaller seeds can go straight to the digestion tract and be deposited somewhere else. So these birds are very helpful in seed dispersal, which in most cases is a very good thing. But for areas that have a lot of native, non-native or invasive plants, they will often eat those berries and kind of spread that range as well too. And of course, those can take off super quickly, which can be very frustrating when you're trying to monitor those types of plants. So that's why even if if you have non-native plants in your yard and you're like, oh, well, it's just in my yard. Is it? There's always the chance that birds can move that location to somewhere else with the seeds and the berries that it eats. When it comes to nesting, in this case, we're primarily going to have the wood thrush during nesting season. But for those that are living in a more northern population, you guys have the hermit thrush there. Oftentimes, these birds kind of can place their nest in the center of a territory, and it takes about 7 to 10 days to build. Because hermit thrushes have such a large range, their eastern and western populations do two different things. The western population will nest in shrubs and small trees, while the eastern population nest on the ground and are often concealed by a single overhead structure, like a fern or a small plant. So, on this right picture here is actually what that nest site might look like, and right in the center of this photo, right here, this little hole is where the nest for a hermit thrush is. Sometimes a lot of the times, I'll show like close-up pictures, so we don't actually know how big these nests are. But if you were kind of walking about in the woods somewhere, you wouldn't necessarily see something like this. So it's well concealed, well hidden, and blends right in with its overall surroundings. Compared to the hermit thrush, a lot of the wood thrush will nest in trees and shrubs. Oftentimes, their nests can be closer to like the trunk of a tree or the large kind of crook of a branch as well. Their nests can be moderately visible and use a mix of dead grass, stems, sometimes some plastics, and like the robins, will also utilize a mud foundation. So in this case, let me find that video. That's not how I wanted to find the video. There it is. Okay. In this case, this is a wood thrush utilizing and working on building its nesting site. You can see it's located on a nice crook of that branch, and oftentimes they'll kind of build that base material and kind of curl the material on itself. As you can see, it's trying very hard with this one leaf. And not only that, but when they're kind of tamping down the space in that nest, they'll often kind of squat down and push their feet to kind of get that overall style of shape that they're looking for as well too. So, again, a behavior we don't usually get to see in person, so it's very fun to see people getting the chance to videotape and record these as well too, which I love that. So let me see. Yep. Okay. So oftentimes when these nests are built, they're a bulky style cup nest. They can have anywhere from 1 to 2 broods, depending on the season and how well things are going. And they can have anywhere from 3 to 4 eggs. A lot of species in this family have eggs that range to be that kind of blue color. Like I mentioned earlier, our eastern bluebirds and our American robins are in this family, hence the blue eggs, which is also really cool. Of course, other species outside of this family can also have blue eggs, but I just find that an interesting fact. Oftentimes, the eggs range from light blue for the hermit thrush or a turquoise green for the wood thrush, and some species outside of that do have some spots on their shells as well, so they're not always completely blue. Again, entirely dependent on the species as well. Oftentimes, with incubation and nesting, that can take about 30 days before these birds fledge entirely. And with this nest as well, you can see that kind of mud, oh my goodness, that intersection of mud that the wood thrush utilized for their nest as well too. But when these birds finally finish nesting and when they finally fledge, the fledglings scatter to the wind and the parents split up the care in order to care for both of these fledglings. Oftentimes they stay in the nest site, they are just out of the nest, which does again make it harder for certain predators to find them, which is good. But they'll often remain with the parents for about 2 to 3 weeks, and they'll leave the nest site after 1 month. So just to show a little bit of that as well too. So this is a wood thrush fledgling as well. And again, with big stretch, with fledglings, you'll often notice they have very little tail feathers. Their wing feathers don't quite look grown all the way. You're going to see some downy tufts on the top as well too, because they're still getting a lot of their feathers in as well. And again, in most cases, they're not going to move too far from that nesting site in the first month. Lots of juveniles in the thrush family do have a lot of additional speckling compared to the adults. So oftentimes on their wing feathers, there's usually an extra speckle or an extra streak. If you've ever seen American robins or eastern bluebirds, for example, eastern bluebirds especially are very different from the adults. You can see that speckling in action. It's just kind of a helpful oh my goodness, camouflage aspect to keep predators from being able to find them or making them a little bit inconspicuous in comparison while they're still getting older. And in this case, I'm going to scooch this video along just a bit because it's always fun to watch this part. So just because you see a fledgling on your own doesn't mean that the adult isn't somewhere nearby watching or potentially getting food as well too. So as long as a fledgling looks bright, alert, and responsive, they are free to do their own thing. Of course, we are outside of nesting season. That's March through August, and it depends entirely on your location as well. For our area, it's March through August, so keep that in mind as well too. Oftentimes, when they finally leave the nesting site, juveniles can flock with other juveniles before making their way to their destination or potentially migrating as well too. Oftentimes, in those flocks, maybe you have a adult or two that kind of help navigate them, but for the most part, it is those largely juvenile flocks that can occur. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but right now there is an issue with habitat fragmentation and destruction, especially for wood thrush and many other different species of songbirds. Populations have been going down tremendously since the 70s, and they've kind of continued to do so. So it's one of those things where trying to bring awareness to that is very important. Habitat fragmentation can occur in many different ways. A very obvious example is if you have a large swatch of forest, for example, and you cut right through the middle with a highway or some apartments or things like that as well too. What exactly does that do to a landscape of old woods? So for example, beforehand you had this very large old wooded area, which had some forest edge affected by sunlight, but very deep forest with a thick canopy of trees in the center. Obviously, you have some smaller plants or different types of trees that do well with some sun, while others focus well in more shady habitats. By putting that, by kind of like cutting right through the center, we've switched the entire shape of the forest in general. Some of those species of plants may not be able to persist in that new environment. It alters the overall forest composition. It could potentially make it difficult for certain birds or certain wildlife in general to get to nesting habitats versus wintering habitats. Maybe there's food resources in one section that aren't available in another. It could be a wide variety of things, and it also changes like species sustainability. If certain plants can no longer persist in a high quantity in that forest, that may not help sustain certain types of birds, so they have to find a different location to go to. It disrupts resources and routes for many different wildlife, and oftentimes when that happens, the different types of wildlife may be forced to explore different territories, or for example, if it's a highway, certain animals will have to cross in order to get to those resources that they're missing. And oftentimes this can be a very life-threatening experience as well too. And it's dangerous, at least for the wood thrush, because that fragmentation and destruction is happening both in their nesting habitats and their wintering habitats, which puts a huge strain on this species as well. So what can we kind of do to help with that, or at least be mindful and kind of help support that? One option, at least for those of us here in the States, is habitat certification. The National Wildlife Federation does something where it's basically you certify your habitat, which is a self-proven type of certification, where it shows that you have food, water, shelter, places to raise young, and sustainable practices in place to help support your wildlife, whether that's just your pollinators who also need help, or if that's for your songbirds or other wildlife. All of these things can be very helpful in sustaining that area. And maybe you don't have a super big yard. That's really not a problem, because even a small balcony that has different types of plants or host plants for pollinators, or maybe resources for certain birds or things like that. Maybe you've just got a small swatch of area that you can do kind of raised little gardens or something like that. If you know an area in like a local park or at your school that can potentially utilize this type of option, by kind of connecting this little patchwork section together, it's better than nothing and still provides a lot of those wildlife with the support that they need. So just because you don't have a big yard doesn't mean you can't do anything if you would like to help in this area. And right now, because it's important, leaving the leaves in certain sections of your yard can be very beneficial. You don't have to do the whole thing. I know some people like to have parts clean, or maybe it's a hazard to have so many leaves if you're trying to get somewhere. But if you can designate a certain section of your yard with leaves that you have left untouched, that is very helpful for a lot of pollinator life cycles. Different types of caterpillars, or different types of insects in general will kind of hide in the leaves and overwinter in those areas. So by leaving those leaves alone, we're help supporting those. And also, as I kind of mentioned earlier, for wood thrush anyways, obviously they like that sub canopy and they like that leaf litter there, which provides kind of moist soils and different aspects there. A lot of birds and other wildlife can use some of those insects or other things as a part of their diet, especially in this time of year as well too. So keeping that stuff in mind can be very beneficial as well. Not only that, but let's say you're not really one for working out in your yard, you don't have a yard, you don't really know where to get started in that aspect. One other way that you can help is if you drink a lot of coffee, you can pay attention to the label and you can actually find bird-friendly coffee. So there are different coffee brands that are bird-friendly. So they're certified by scientists at the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center that show that wherever this coffee is produced, the farm has strict requirements in place for both the amount of shade and forest where that coffee is grown. Oftentimes on certain coffee farms, they will kind of raise a lot of that upper canopy because they don't need that in order to grow the coffee. Well, of course, that is some habitat destruction there for a lot of different wildlife and a lot of our songbirds. So in certain places, they're kind of making sure to pay attention to leaving some of the forest canopy available and still providing habitat for a lot of our songbirds. So this helps support farmers and sustainable practices that many people may not even consider to be beneficial. So it's awesome because we're helping support them even if we're not right there and it's not quite our it's not where we live essentially. So other certifications may not support native plants. So it's important to kind of read up on the different types of oh my goodness, certifications that you may see on your coffee, because certain ones may say, yeah, we offer shade for our at these farms and everything like that, but they may use different agricultural plants that aren't native to that area and don't help sustain the wildlife in that location as well too. So one thing that we've started carrying is like the Thanksgiving coffee company's different types of roasts as well too. They are bird friendly certified as well, which is awesome. So feel free to kind of try some of that out. There's different like single sachets of coffee you can try, or even if you're out in like the grocery store, take a look at the different types of coffees you may find and consider that the next time that you're out buying your coffee. When it comes to attracting these birds, and I'm almost done, I know we just hit 9, hermit thrushes are the ones that we'll be getting in the winter time, and oftentimes they're more kind of ground foragers. They definitely can do some clinging, as you can see in this photo here, but it depends again on location whether or not you'll see them. But the things that are most attractive to them include items like bark butter, which is a spreadable type of suet, or even the suet cakes, because again, these birds eat a lot of softer food items like your insects and fruit. Mealworms are also a great option for them as well too. And oftentimes you can also use deshelled seed like sunflower to offer them as well too. Using a tray feeder or a hopper feeder might be best just because again these birds are ground feeders, so providing more open space for them can be very beneficial and something that they enjoy as well. Of course, like I mentioned, in the winter time, they do prefer that access to fruits. So if you have smaller shrub species or certain tree species like the ones listed here, that's going to be super interesting for them in general. And if you're looking to kind of add to your yard or providing different types of native plants, you can check out audubon.org/native plants or nativeplantfinder.nwf.org. Both of those show different options to support options of like host plants for different types of caterpillars and pollinators, while the other focuses more on your birds as well. So feel free to take a look at that, and if you're kind of slowly working your way to building your habitat or seeing what plants are in your yard, that can help you get like a good start in that area as well too. And with that being said, that's all I have to say about thrushes. That went on a little bit longer than I'd like, so I hope you guys learned a lot as well too. Like last time, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology is where a lot of these resources are received with the Macaulay Library, just because that's where a lot of like the videos and the photos come from as well. Allaboutbirds.org is a great kind of easy to read resource if you want to learn more about any of these specific species as well too. So feel free to check any of those out. And for those of you that are coming in the store today, if you listen to the presentation, I have a coupon code for you, so you can get $5 off a $25 purchase or more with the coupon code Thrush. Only available today either through in-store or phone order, so feel free to let us know there. And we'll be having a second viewing of this presentation in store at 11 if you know anybody in the area that might be interested in checking that out. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for joining me today. I always really appreciate it. We are in, what is it? It is November, so soon enough we'll be having Thanksgiving as well. So happy Thanksgiving to those who celebrate as well. And I will see you guys next time. So have a wonderful day and enjoy the weekend.